Thank you all so much for dialing in on a Thursday evening to talk to me, and thank you to Anna and the trauma care team for the opportunity to talk. I'm Major Matt Ellington. I am an anaesthetic registrar in the real world, but I don't actually give any anaesthetics at the moment. I am out of programme to do a PhD on dried plasma. My PhD is funded by the UK Ministry of Defence, but I am embedded within NHS Blood and Transplants Component Development Laboratory in Cambridge to do that work. I first gave this presentation in March at the Trauma Care Conference in the Midlands and Telford, and I've been invited back. So I've padded it out a bit and put some updates in. So even if you heard me then, I hope today will be equally as entertaining. So the brilliant thing about doing a PhD is the opportunity to read around the subject a bit. And I'm not particularly intellectual or bright, so really, as far as I've got, is reading the book that Die Hard was based on. The book's called Nothing Lasts Forever, and it was written in 1979. But right at the end, as John McClane comes out of the Nakatomi Plaza, meets Sergeant Alpal, he's then sort of gets medical care. And on the last page, that medical care talks about hooking him up to a unit of dried plasma. So obviously, everyone knows that Die Hard is the best Christmas film ever. But what I'm hoping to persuade you of this evening is that not only does Die Hard represent gold standard for fighting in a built-up urban area and marauding terrorism firearm offences, but it also represents the gold standard of pre-hospital blood-based resuscitation. And this is from the late 70s, so nearly 50 years old already. So it's a timeless classic. So this is blood, and bleeding is bad, blood on the floor is bad, hemorrhage is bad, and exsanguination is really bad. Unfortunately, exsanguination isn't uncommon though. Hemorrhage is the leading cause of potentially preventable death in military trauma situations and in civilian trauma situations. Postpartum hemorrhage regularly features as one of the top 3 direct causes of maternal mortality worldwide. And the Royal College of Anaesthetists National Audit Project NAP7, published earlier this year, demonstrated that hemorrhage was the most common cause of patients requiring CPR whilst under a general anaesthetic. So more common than anaphylaxis, more common than dysrhythmias or ischemic heart disease, and more common than great vessel manipulation. So hemorrhage is really bad and very common. Despite how common it is, we really know very little about how best to treat it. Broadly speaking, we can either, on the left of this diagram, give some salty water like saline or Hartmann's, and that the benefit of those fluids are that they are very easy to store. No one really cares what temperature you store them at or where you store them, and there's no sort of governance trail behind their storage or use particularly. On the right hand side is blood, and we can give lots of different bits of blood, and I'll go through how those are made as well. But blood's really complex in that we have to match the donor to the recipient. There's a very complex temperature controlled storage cold chain that they have to go through as well. So I understand lots of you won't be familiar with blood components or the derivation of which bits are good and which bits are not good. So I'll fly through that fairly quickly now. If you imagine someone, a donor, sitting and giving a pint of blood, then that blood can be given straight to an appropriately matched recipient, and that's whole blood, and that's really good blood. That whole blood includes all of the plasma, all of the coagulation factors, all of the platelets, and all of the red blood cells that came out of that donor. That's really good for trauma, but actually most of NHS blood and transplants use go to patients who just have low red blood count, anemia, who have low platelets, thrombocytopenia, or who had difficulties in making their blood clot, such a coagulopathy. If we gave whole blood to everybody, we'd obviously need 3 times as much. So your one blood donation normally gets spun down and looks like a test tube, like you can see here. The bottom red bit is the red blood cells, and they traditionally carry oxygen. Red blood cells, to make them last a bit longer, are pickled in acid and potassium and other nasty stuff, and then kept in the fridge before they can be given. The plasma is by far the best bit, and that's got some really big proteins in it, and those big proteins act as a volume expander and improve patients' blood pressures. It's also got some medium-sized proteins, that all of the coagulation factors and all of the little bits that help your blood clot and are essential for blood clotting. And then it's also got some really little things that we don't know what they are or how they work, but they stabilize the blood vessel walls and stop inflammatory cascades and multi-organ dysfunction down the line. In between the plasma and the red cells is this tiny little thing called the buffy coat, and that contains the white blood cells and the platelets. Because the volume here is very small, you need to add 5 of those together to make a pool of platelets. Platelets are really difficult to store and to maintain before you give them to a patient, and they only last for 5 days. So I think pre-hospital use of platelets, we're a way off, and that's logistically almost impossible. Plasma, as the best fluid, does have some downsides, so I'm afraid. The clotting factors degrade over time very quickly, particularly factor 8. So plasma is usually frozen almost immediately once it's spun down after donation. And then it can be taken out of the freezer when you have a bleeding patient who needs it. The downside is to defrost plasma takes about 30 minutes. So waiting 30 minutes with an exsanguinating patient for the plasma, this life-saving treatment, to thaw out is frankly inconvenient. One of the big trials in pre-hospital blood products administration was the refill trial, and that was published about 2.5 years ago. I'll pick and choose which bits of it I present, but the bit I found most interesting was lots of people say we should give red blood cells because they take oxygen to the tissues, and these patients need oxygen. The refill trial put people into 2 groups. So some patients received some red cells and some plasma, and the other group received just that cold, salty water, some saline. You can see, so the way that patients were enrolled is they were visited by a HEMS team on the roadside or wherever their injury was, and if they were judged to be bleeding to death by the doctor treating them, then they had a lactate measured, and then they had either the red cells or the saline. For the patients, or the lactate, for those of you not familiar, is a measure of the anaerobic respiration of cells. So if cells aren't getting oxygen, they switch to anaerobic respiration and produce lactate. So a high lactate means lots of the body is working anaerobically. And the theory being that if you give red cells, the red cells will carry oxygen, the cells will have that oxygen and then be able to aspire aerobically, and the lactate should drop. You can see the lactate for both groups of patients, the red cells and plasma group and the saline group, was about the same pre-hospital. After that, the patients got either red cells and plasma or saline, and then they went to hospital and they had their lactate checked again. The group with the bigger lactate clearance was actually the group who received saline. So if you see people giving red cells to improve oxygen carriage, I think this is a really useful table to push back and say that red cells don't improve oxygen carriage. They do give a lot of extra acid and a lot of extra potassium to these patients as well. So given that it's really, really difficult to conduct high quality clinical studies in the pre-hospital environment, some of the best evidence comes from animals, and animals are easier to work on because you don't have to worry so hard about consent, and you can make it a bit more controlled. So this paper was done at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, and they took some pigs and made them bleed. So gave them a general anaesthetic and then induced a liver laceration and a femoral artery injury onto them. After the pigs started bleeding, they waited 30 minutes to simulate sort of typical pre-hospital response times, and then randomized those pigs into 5 different groups. The pigs in the golden line group received no treatment at all. Those were the control piggies. The pigs in the blue line group received saline, and all the other pigs in here in the red line, but you can see there's actually 3 different lines, received either packed red blood cells with fresh frozen plasma, plasma alone, or fresh whole blood. I think there's lots to take away from this graph, but you can certainly see that if you are a bleeding pig and you don't get any treatment at all, you've got about a 50% chance of surviving the first hour, and you will 100% be dead by 4 hours. If you're a bleeding pig that receives some saline, that will keep you alive for about an hour and a half. However, if you're a bleeding pig that receives any bit of blood at all, then you will live happily ever after until 450 minutes, when all of these animals were euthanized. So my take on this, and sort of the consensus I think on this as well, is that blood components are superior to crystalloids. Crystalloids are a bit better than nothing, but really we have to be getting blood components into patients early. And how early? Really, you can see that after 30 minutes, patients start dying if they don't have any treatment. So, moving from the piggies now to some American actual patients. PAMPA was the really big trial published looking at pre-hospital plasma administration. PAMPA came out in 2018, and it looked at patients who again were judged to be bleeding to death pre-hospitally. Ones in the intervention arm received 2 units of thawed plasma, and the comparator was standard of care, which was, I think, saline. Once the patients then got to hospital and then were followed up, and PAMPA demonstrated a 10% survival improvement for those patients who received plasma compared to those who didn't. Now, a year later, COMBAT came out, and that was the exact same population studied, the same intervention, the same comparator, and the same outcome was measured. The difference with COMBAT, it was just done in a different geographical area and was just a single centre study with slightly fewer patients. Frustratingly, despite exactly the same methodology, COMBAT didn't show any improvement at all for patients who received plasma. However, because everything around the trial methodology was synchronized, it allowed for a post hoc meta-analysis of the data. And the upshot of pooling both the PAMPA and the COMBAT numbers together was that if you have a long pre-hospital time, more than 20 minutes, patients will benefit from pre-hospital plasma. But if you can essentially scoop and run and be in hospital in less than 20 minutes, pre-hospital plasma was of no benefit at all. So this is really the picture that made me want to join the Army. So this is it's an oil painting commissioned in 2007 called Battle Mist, and it shows a injured UK service personnel who I think has been shot through their left femur. You can see that the medic has really just got halfway through the primary survey. He's only just put up a bag of fluids, and in that time the radio operator has radioed this in, and already there is a medical emergency response team present about to whisk this patient off to Camp Bastion, where within 30 minutes of injury, he will be seen by the full plethora of surgical teams and surgical techniques available. So in this military operating environment where patients can get to a hospital within 30 minutes, even with data now 10 years after this picture was done, I think it's entirely appropriate for a bit of crystalloid pre-hospital and then gets to the patient to hospital really quickly. And that's really been borne out in the paper that came out this year or late last year about blood use in Afghanistan. This paper is open access, so that QR code will take you straight to the PDF if you want it. But the highlights for me were that there were 72,000 units of blood or blood components given at Camp Bastion, so by the UK Medical Treatment Facility. On average, patients needed loads of blood, so the average was 8 units and the median 13 units of blood. And of those 72,000 blood components given in Afghanistan, only 111 of them were given pre-hospitally, despite blood and packed red cells and plasma being carried by the medical emergency response team as early as 2007. So to summarize that, Afghanistan, or a military environment where you can get patients very, very quickly from point of injury to hospital, then waiting until hospital arrival for blood transfusion is acceptable, is doable. However, future military operating environments are very unlikely to be able to move patients from point of injury to hospital quickly. This is the Médecins Sans Frontières train in the Ukraine, and there's similar versions and similar photos online of the military versions in Ukraine. But really, patients arriving at hospital 12 or 18 hours after being injured. Clearly, that's much too late to start blood transfusion, and the window of opportunity has gone. Everything I've presented so far has been from the military environment, but how does that translate into the civilian side? So I live near Cambridge, and it doesn't seem a lot different. The East of England Ambulance Service is apparently the slowest to respond to life-threatening scenarios. And again, this is another table from the refill trial, but you can see this, I think, involved 6 UK HEMS teams. The average call from time from 999 call to HEMS arrival is half an hour. And then by the time they've finished with the mirrors and doing a bit of basic work, it was another half an hour before delivering any interventions at all. So it's really challenging to get blood to patients quickly. And despite, or even with a clinical trial infrastructure, best efforts were really an hour between point of injury and delivering pre-hospital blood products in the civilian sector. I've really only spoken clinically so far, but it's worth mentioning there's lots of other implications of having lots of blood supplies in a military environment. Back in January of 2022, when Russia were moving lots of troops and lots of military kit around Russia and onto the Ukrainian border, one of the things that differentiated a military training exercise from preparing for war was the medical and the combat service support for that. By Russia moving lots of blood stocks forward to the Ukrainian border and advertising amongst the Russian university students to give blood, this is one of the signals that the international intelligence community thought this is a war, preparations for war. So by having blood stocks that we don't have to freeze, don't have to keep temperature stable, and the governance around moving it aren't too high, then that will help conceal any military intent better. Furthermore, blood donation centres or blood donation supply chains represent a real vulnerable point and potential single point of failure in supporting both civilian and military healthcare infrastructure. Russia has been deliberately targeting Ukrainian blood transfusion centres in the hope that blood can't go forward, so they'll impede the Ukrainian war effort. Oh, excuse me. So back in February, Western Belgorod was in Russia. I think it may have changed ownership since then, but this is some satellite imagery of a military field hospital there. You can see within the red box, apparently that's a field hospital. To many eyes, that would just look like a row of tents. But what gives away military field hospitals is once you switch from normal imagery to infrared or electromagnetic spectrum imagery, and then the infrared footprint of generators and freezers to maintain appropriate temperature of blood stock just really give it away. There's no other reason to have a freezer in a military environment apart from a hospital with a frozen plasma. So one of the benefits of dried plasma that can be, or a plasma product that can be stored at room temperature or ambient temperature, is that enhanced concealment of medical assets. So I hope that sort of run through of the background has convinced you that we need something to give pre-hospitally, and that blood component is better than a crystalloid like saline or like Hartmann's if we can. The product that we need needs to be immediately available for use. We can't wait until patients get to hospital because they get into hospital much too late. At the moment, really the key personnel that you need for blood transfusion is a biomedical scientist who can do the thawing, do the cross-matching, and man the temperature sensitive cold chains. If we had a blood product that we could give pre-hospital that was immediately available for use and was independent and uncoupled from personnel requirements like a biomedical scientist, wouldn't that be marvelous? So, and without any complex logistics and cold chains. So, Anna, I'm just going to try and reshare my screen without the audio, so hopefully this one will work. 1 second, sorry.
Okay, so it's time for elevator music. I can't sing, so this might be no. Whilst I've got everyone looking at me, and Matt's doing this, and oh, you can see me twice. David did point it out before, but I did forget to put this in as well. If you happen to be a student with us tonight, or a junior clinician, newly qualified medic, any kind of sort of non-senior role, do check out the FIT course on our website as well. It's a weekend course taking place in November. Dave Nichols, who's with us tonight, is one of our faculty members. It's a full weekend practical course that basically we're generating field hospital bays in the middle of Yarnfield, and I'm going to be running around pretending I'm a patient that's been, well, you'll find out what's happened to me. And it's a full practical hands-on weekend, perfect for anyone who is junior. So do check it out over on our website, and hopefully we'll see you there. There are very limited tickets available, and they've been flying out the door. So do grab them whilst you can. Matt, we shall try.
Like putting the pressure back on it again?
Yeah, certainly can.
Yeah.
Lay down.
Blood Far Forward program is designed to get blood and blood-based resuscitation, including plasma, to injured service personnel within 30 minutes of point of wounding. So evidence out of Afghanistan and Iraq has shown that blood giving within 30 minutes of point of wounding increases the survival of our casualties. Dried plasma in particular will decrease our reliance on the use of frozen plasma. The development of a UK sovereign dried plasma capability in partnership with the NHS and sponsored by the Army will allow us to decrease our reliance on importing dried plasma from abroad.
This is a collaboration between NHS Blood and Transplant, the Ministry of Defence, and a commercial company called Velico Medical. We want to look at the ability of becoming UK self-sufficient in production of dried plasma. The advantage of dried plasma for the military is that it could be easily reconstituted within a few minutes simply by adding 200 ml of sterile water. So this is the sort of thing that personnel could carry in their backpacks and very quickly to patients who need it within a matter of minutes. But this is very much part of a pathway of innovation to translate research and development through to improved patient care.
Sorry, I will just reshare my screen and try and get rid of this this audio bug that we've got. So, Anna, can you just come to check again and confirm you can see a fridge?
I can see a fridge.
Excellent, good. So, that is sort of the trailer for the UK dried plasma program, and it's all very exciting. This fridge-looking machine is made by Velico Medical, and it's a spray drying machine. The world's first commercial one is being delivered to the Component Development Lab at Cambridge in the next week or so. So this is a perfectly timed webinar, and it will look like the machine will look like this. On the left is what plasma looks like after it's been dried. The Velico system will have a sort of plastic envelope like this on the left, and then you squirt in 200 ml of sterile water, And to make it up like you see on the right-hand side of the picture, it takes about 5 minutes to reconstitute, so it's not immediate, but it is much quicker than waiting for FFP to thaw or trying to get a patient to hospital. So yeah, I'd like to just sort of briefly switch tack and now talk about a much more important resuscitation fluid, and that is coffee. And coffee can bring me back from the very brink of death. But to get that delicious cappuccino is logistically quite complicated. If you start with the beans, then you're going to have power to grind those beans down, and then more power and water, and that water's got to be clean, to turn into steam to drive through the beans to make your coffee. After that, you're going to have to find some milk, and that milk needs a cold chain transport links and a fridge to keep it in. And then more steam again and more power to froth and steam that milk. So if you need your cappuccino and you happen to be outside of a coffee shop, then that's perfect. But if you're on a battlefield and you really need some caffeine, then it's impractical to get a barista and all of the personnel and the equipment and the cold chain out to you. And it may not be possible to move you to the barista. So what you can do instead is freeze dry or spray dry or lyophilize those coffee beans and just add water. And what you end up with is instant coffee. It's very much the same with blood in that nobody in their right mind would choose an instant coffee over a lovely cappuccino. But if you're in a place where the only real comparator is instant coffee or nothing, or death, or a glass of water, then the instant coffee becomes much more favorable. So these data are from Velico themselves, who make the machine, and they're probably slightly optimistic, but we're anticipating about a 10 to 20% drop in most of the coagulation factors, certainly factor 2 through 12, between the pre-drying and the post-drying phase. The things that do worse with drying are likely to be fibrinogen and von Willebrand factor, somewhere around a 20 to 40% drop in the drying process. We're not really sure the clinical impact of having less coagulation factors in that. So part of my PhD will be looking at how these clots form and comparing dried plasma and fresh frozen plasma and seeing what actually is the impact of having this slightly lower. Many of you, particularly sort of in HEM services, will say that this is all very good, but it was being used 100 years ago in the war, and then you may be familiar with using either Lyoplas or potentially FLIP clinically now. And this is just sort of a table I knocked up to show the key differences. Lyoplas is made by the German Red Cross and FLIP is made in France. The UK spray-dried plasma will be manufactured in the UK, but crucially also the donors will be from the UK. So it will give much in the light of, or in the wake of the infected blood scandal, having UK ownership of the donors and the donor screening and the haemovigilance, I think will be important. Like both Lyoplas and FLIP are lyophilized rather than spray dried, and there's not really a lot of difference in that. Apart from spray drying is much easier to scale up. Lyophilization is a process that takes a couple of days, whereas spray drying is about 30 minutes per unit. So if all of a sudden we need to make a lot of plasma, it's much easier to put a night shift onto the spray drying machine rather than trying to, the lyophilization process is saturated. UK use or use on UK personnel of Lyoplas and FLIP is off-label, but the UK spray dried plasma will be approved and regulated by the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, which just gives an extra layer of top cover for us. Lyoplas say their reconstitution time is 10 minutes, FLIP say 5 minutes, and the UK one is averaging about 7 minutes, so right in the middle, but obviously depends on the temperature of the powder and of the sterile water for injection. So the real benefit of a dried plasma is that you don't need to store it in a freezer and can be stored really just at ambient temperatures for up to a couple of years. Lyoplas say that happy up to 15 months at up to 25 degrees, and flip for 2 years. We haven't yet made a UK dried plasma because we don't have the machine, but one part of the validatory work will be seeing how it does and sort of giving a best before. We are anticipating it being good for probably 3 years in the fridge, 2 years at room temperature, and shorter than that, up maybe even as short as a month at temperatures of up to 40 degrees. Crucially, so one of the things I haven't mentioned, or one of the downsides I haven't mentioned about fresh frozen plasma, is once you freeze the plastic bags, they become really brittle, and up to 40% of deployed FFP bags break. That's the same for lyoplasm flip, where they're kept in a glass vial. So if they're in the back of a Bergen or a dismounted medical kit, then you open your kit and you just get a sharps injury from all the shards. The UK spray dried plasma will be in a plastic envelope like you've already seen in the picture. So it should be much less liable to getting broken. And then probably beyond the scope of this, and we're still ironing out the issues, is the ABO compatibility. We are anticipating only supplying UK military with Group AB, so that it is a universal plasma and can be given to anybody, and crucially don't need to wait for a cross match before giving it. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. That's a whistle-stop tour of the UK dried plasma project with a military focus, but obviously huge civilian applicability. I'd be delighted to take any photos. No, sorry, jet lagged. Any questions if you have them? Thank you.
And photos, if you guys want. I'm sure we can. I'm sure I can come off screen and Matt can just pose for a little bit, just a quick jet lag smile.
Yeah, just send me photos. All questions.
Send photos of cute dogs. It always helps jet lag. So let's just do the usual and get onto the correct screen. And share screen, and now it's my turn to go through everything. Here we are, everyone. So let me just get the Q&As up. Let me get the chat up before I lose everything. We'll move this down. We shall click play. If anyone saw me this weekend, you'd think this should run a lot smoother, because leads in my hand, fine. Stuff in front of me clicking, terrible. However, I do just want to draw attention to our next webinar. As per usual, we are teaming up with our good friends over at Day One Trauma Support. So we've always sort of said we're sort of each other's other halves when it comes to trauma. We sort of deal with the doctors and they deal with the patients. So together, sort of a yin and yang and make a whole. So we are very delighted to be teaming up with them to bring everything together under one roof for a very special one-off webinar. This is going to be taking place on Tuesday, and we're going to be joined by, I think we've got 6 different speakers now. We're going to be looking at the doctor's side of everything. So we're going to be looking at nurses and the actual medical point of things, of how to help trauma victims on that side of stuff. And we're also going to be having some special guest speakers who are victims of trauma themselves, and they're going to be talking to us about patient stories. And as well, because we know that everybody loves, as medical folk, we love our stats, we love our figures, we love our numbers. We're going to be having a quick look and the figures of everything coming up as well. So do scan the QR code that's on your screen now. Can't guarantee it's the correct QR code, for which I do apologise. You can tell I've been off for the last couple of days. However, do go over to our website if that QR code is wrong and click down. You'll be able to see the webinar there to sign up for free. It's not an hour long either. It's probably going to end at about 10 o'clock because we have got so much to go through. So do consider signing up. Let me just find... Yes, you are correct, Phil. And of course, we are now on to the portion of the evening, which is the Q&A section. However, I just want to draw your attention to the massive QR code that's on your screen. This massive QR code is your CPD certificate. If you are not a member, if you aren't a member of Trauma Care, scan the QR code that's on your screen now, and you will have the ability to purchase a certificate for £1.99, or you can sign up to become a member of Trauma Care for just £3 a month, in which case, it's only £1 more, and you will get approximately 4 CPD certificates for free this month. So really, you're saving yourself quite a bit of money. So do scan the QR code on your screen now if you don't want to sign up to become a member of Trauma Care, and it will be sent straight to your inbox if I've set everything up correctly. Okay, so questions. Matt, are you ready?
Yes.
Wonderful. So the lovely Dr. Mr. Phil Cowburn has asked first off, of course, you were straight in there, Phil. So for large-scale incident, a bit of crystalloid in first 2030, followed by freeze-dried plasma. And Phil, I've told you about putting big words in that I don't know. Fibrinogen concentrate would work, of course, with IMTXA. There should be a QR code on the screen. Is there not one there?
I can see a QR code, yeah.
All right, no worries, Paige. What I'll be doing tomorrow anyway is sending across a link. So if you can't see the QR code for whatever reason, there will be a link. So yeah, so kind of a comment from Phil, but also a question.
I think it's a very good comment and a very good question. Yeah, a little bit of crystalloid if you have to, and then dried plasma, bulk dried plasma for everybody. And the fibrinogen concentrate is not my area of expertise, so I'll defer on that one. But yeah, dried plasma pre-hospital for everyone is going to be good.
Perfect. Sapphire Hollands has asked, who is the predicted target audience to administer this new product within the military? Would it be combat medics or military paramedics?
Excellent question, thank you. So the anticipation is that this will be available within 30 minutes of injury, which doesn't really fit in with the NATO timelines. The requirement from the UK MOD is for 1,000 units a year. So I'd hope that these can be given to dismounted combat medical technicians. And obviously the other key skill that people carrying it have to have it is cannulation. So yeah, I think certainly for the paramedics, and I hope down to combat medical technicians down on the ground as well.
All, hopefully all.
Everyone can have it. Yeah.
Plasma for all. Adam Bolton, apologies if I've said your last name wrong there, Adam. Excellent presentation, Matt. Thank you very much. You mentioned refill failed to detect benefits of PRBC. This trial also included Lioplas and didn't find benefit. What is the rationale that this Velico product will demonstrate benefit that Lioplas didn't?
Excellent question. Yeah, so the outcome measurement for refill was a composite one of clearance of lactate and mortality. I think the benefit of plasma, obviously clearance of lactate, plasma is going to have no effect on at all. And perhaps the bigger opportunity for plasma is morbidity rather than mortality. So it will stop people bleeding to death, but it will really reduce the coagulopathies of trauma, the multi-organ dysfunction syndrome, the inflammatory cascades later down on the line. So, you know, I think probably the benefit of plasma on its own without the red cells is slightly hidden and obscured by the refill methodology.
Perfect. And following on from the early question as well about sort of who's going to be using it, is how cost effective is the product compared to normal saline?
Well, it's certainly more costly than normal saline. The consumables at the moment are around 500 quid for drying a unit, and we don't really have strong evidence, as I hope I put across, that. Yeah, I guess it's difficult to quantify the benefit between. I'd certainly want plasma if it were me, but if I had to show benefit of that between saline and plasma, it's hard work.
Enough. Phil has asked a very Phil question of how heavy do you think your bag of products going to be?
So it's the powder itself is very light, sort of maybe 100 grams for the powder and the bag, and then the main impact for the providers, I think it will be carrying the sterile water for injection, which is 200 milliliters, and a giving step. Part of the work we'll be doing is looking at reduced volumes of reconstitution. So does it work? Does it reconstitute down to 100 mils, say, which then would obviously halve the weight in the Bergen if you could carry half the fluid.
Amazing. Adam again has come in. Thank you for all the questions, Adam. I really appreciate it. Should we be focusing our efforts on freeze-dried plasma or whole blood? Swift is examining in the civilian setting. In military setting, emergency doctor-donor panels have demonstrated feasibility. Interested in your thoughts?
So yeah, I'd be really interested to see the results of Swift when they come out. I think they're about to stop recruiting and getting that far. But thinking about sort of the timelines of pre-hospital care, particularly in military environments, I don't think it's feasible to get whole blood, whether that's stored or it's cold and old or warm and fresh, into a patient within 30 minutes, particularly with an emergency donor panel. So I think these two could work side by side really nicely, really, whereby after being injured, you get two units or as many units as you need as dried plasma, whilst the emergency blood bank is spinning up. And then you can have whole blood, including platelets thereafter.
And sort of following on from that, and on a very similar vein, so you might just actually end up answering the same thing again, but I just want to make sure just in cases. Flavio's asked, thanks for the great presentation. For the question, how come the spray dry process was chosen over the lyophilization, which I believe degrades less than plasma, apart from logistics of plastic pouches?
So all the contract tendering was done before me starting my PhD, so this is all second-hand sort of information. But the ability to scale up and mass produce plasma, I think, was one of the main benefits. So lyophilization as a process takes 3 days. So if you need a load of plasma very quickly, you can't really do it. Spray drying takes just 30 minutes per unit. So with one machine, you can get 50 units through per 24 hours versus a third of a unit with lyophilization. And with lyophilization, you can put multiple units in the machine at the same time. But just in terms of scaling up ability, I think spray drying peaked it. And really, the coagulation factor activity between the two is really negligible, I think.
Amazing. And finally for tonight, Brian, it's good to see you again. In case of active bleeding, acute hemorrhage, do you use base excess and lactate as indicative of active blood loss versus patient's hemoglobin? Very excellent presentation. Thank you.
An excellent question as well. Thank you. So yeah, I think hemoglobin doesn't drop acutely in a bleed. So base excess and lactate are more sensitive indicators. But the beauty of dried plasma here is that it can be given long before the patients are replaced with an ISTAT or a base excess measuring capability. So if you see a patient bleeding, you can just don't have to think too hard and can give them some plasma, which contains coagulation factors and albumin and all the lovely stuff that will stop them bleeding to death.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Matt. That's the final question for this evening. Now, I just want to remind everyone that if you have signed up using an email address that isn't associated to your trauma care email, please do just drop me personally an email at Anna with an A .hickling, which is HICKLING @traumacare.org.uk, and just say, hey, I'm a member, but I accidentally signed up using my non-member email last night. Please, can I get a free certificate? And I'll make sure that you're issued a correct certificate. So stop scanning if you are a member. If you aren't a member, carry on scanning. So that is all we have time for this evening. That actually rounds us off perfectly at 5 to 9. So well done, Matt. We've done this perfectly timed this evening. So before we leave, of course, a big thank you to the trauma care sponsors. As mentioned at the beginning, a huge thank you to Slater and Gordon, our platinum corporate sponsors who provide us with a lot of help for many different things. So huge thank you to them. Of course, thank you to our other sponsors, our first aid sponsor, QualSafe. You will be able to catch them at the Glasgow conference, mainly because they helped us organise it. So you'll definitely be catching them there. Do go over and say hello to them. I believe Toby and Nigel will be there. If they're not manning the stand, it will be someone else, but Nigel's definitely speaking, as is Toby. Two absolute greats within the first aid stratosphere, and these guys help run some brilliant courses over at QualSafe. So do scan the QR code that's on your screen now and find out more about this wonderful first aid company. And of course, a big thank you to our long-standing friends and partners, Galen. If you were in Belfast over the weekend, you'll have seen them tucked away in the corner on their stand, promoting all things Penthrox, which is their main products and hopefully something you're all very familiar with, which you should be. But if you want to find out more about the other products outside of Penthrox, do scan the QR code that's on your screen now. Click on the side of the site that's for you guys rather than for the patient side, and you can find out more about these things that they have available and the stuff that you might be able to recommend to your trusts. And that is everything. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I know a few of you, and Matt, you especially with your jet lag and straight off a plane, we do really appreciate you taking the time out of a busy schedule to come and be with us tonight. I'm going to say goodbye quickly so you can go off and reset yourself, and hopefully we'll be able to see you again in the future, not so jet lagged. Thank you everybody. We've had people all over from I think from New Zealand, from Gibraltar, from all sorts of places tonight. So it's wonderful to see people joining us from all over the world as per usual. If you didn't manage to get hold of the QR code or scan anything, don't worry. I will be sending the usual email out tomorrow where you can purchase a certificate following the link. However, ignore the link. If you are a member, you will just receive your certificate separately. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Matt, thank you once again. Go and get some rest. Thank you all. Wherever you are in the world, take care of each other and of yourselves. Good night, all.
Aristotle, thank you so much, Anna. Take care.
Bye bye, all.